Hi, I'm Taylor, and welcome to my very first YouTube video, and it's about to get real. So I've always been into art. I did performing arts. I was a theater kid. I was a theater girl. Shout out to my masterful performance as Fruma Sarah and Fiddler on the Roof my senior year of high school. But I was in theater, I danced. I'd been dancing since I was 5 years old. I did competitions, so I love a performance. Performance is actually something that I'm extremely passionate about and something that I hope to explore here in many different ways. But I've always been super into performance. I've been into art. And I attribute that a lot to, of course, my own interests, but also my mom making sure that that was a large part of my life. So we would go to Alvin Ailey every year. She would always take me to my favorite plays. I went to undergrad in Chicago. I came back home and I was like, I need to leave. I majored in communications and public relations. And I kind of just picked that major because it fit at the time. I don't know, I feel like college asks so much of you at such a young age. And it's kind of messed up to have to make those really big decisions about what you're gonna do for the rest of your life in a very short amount of time. Went to Chicago, then I went to DC and I did a grad program out there. And again, I went and did that grad program as an escape, and I can talk about that in another video, but I did a grad program and I got a master's in corporate communications and public relations at Georgetown University in their School of Continuing Studies. DC is like a museum city. There's tons of museums to go to, and the great thing about the museums in DC is that most of them are free, which is beautiful, right? Like, all museums should be free, really. I was out and I was in between classes or in between work. I would just go into the portrait gallery and like chill out for a little bit, right? If I didn't have anything to do on the weekend, I knew that the museum was always there. And as there were so many museums, there were also a lot of museum employees. So a lot of people who live in the area, aside from being employed by the government, are also employed by museums, the Phillips Collection, the Smithsonian. And so I was, DC is a networking city, honey. If you get to DC, the first thing they're gonna ask you is, what do you do? I was meeting a lot of museum professionals, and I was hearing about, I never considered museums as a place for me to work, but I always thought that was so dope. I'm like, oh my God, that's so tight. Like, you work at a museum, like that's hella tight, right? Because I very much enjoy museums. And at this point, I think that I was starting to really figure out what it is that I wanted to do with myself and my career and my life's work. And it really had nothing to do with PR and communications. I was meeting a lot of museum professionals, and it was like, I didn't even know about the types of jobs that existed really within museums. We all know what a curator is. We all know what a curator does. Do you know about installation? Do you know about fabrication? Do you know about education programs? For me, it was an eye-opener to be like, whoa, look at this large scope of job that I can have, or that exists or is available to me within museums. So I moved back home to Oakland. Shout outs, I'm from Oakland, California. But I moved back home and I knew that I wanted to get a job working sort of like in a more artistic space. Before that, I was working at a PR firm, and we had retail, hospitality, and entertainment clients. By that point, I had figured out like, this is just not a career path for me, y'all. I'm talking about, I'm not getting my work done. I'm literally just staring at my computer, and I was like, I don't like this work. I just don't like it. I hate it. So I knew, I was like, I want to make a career transition. And one of the spaces that I really, really wanted to work in was art. And I really, really was interested in working in museums. And I had identified that again when I was in DC. And I was looking for jobs, I was applying to stuff. I was maybe getting to like the final stage of interviews, but it wasn't clicking. And I finally was like, okay, Taylor, like, you are trying to get your foot in the door, especially if it's like art and museum world, you're trying to get your foot into that door. Maybe it's best for you to like get a foot in by doing what you already have experience in and a lot of knowledge in. So I was like, okay, I feel like if a job opens up at a museum that is communications related, I'm going to apply. And I was home, I was depressed, I didn't have a job. Then I started working at the amazing youth center that I grew up at, who has always held me down. Shout out to YDC. But I started working there part-time, and I was looking for more full-time work. And I came across a communications associate job at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And it was one of those things where it was like, if it's for me, it's for me. Funny enough, I grew up with this print, this Diego Rivera print in our house since I was like a little thing. And my parents always said, like, this print looks like you, like this little girl in this painting looks like you. And the picture is Girl with Coral Necklace by Diego Rivera. And it's a little girl, and the background is, I'm looking at it right now, but the background is white, blue, and red. And she's wearing a white, blue, and red dress, and she has on a coral necklace and some gold tooth earring. I never knew where the original lived, but I never thought much about it until I applied for the job at SF MoMA, and I found out that that print lives there. So that felt like it was a sign. I had an idea of the racism that existed within museums and sort of like the art world in general. I had a very good idea of it because I don't know, as for myself, I can only speak for myself, but as for myself, as just a Black woman who has been in a lot of spaces, I know that racism is everywhere. It's the foundation of our country, right? Like it is, and these institutions that we have, especially art museums, are extensions of that very foundation to which this country was built. And we already know, like, museums do a ton of looting. If you go to a museum and they have like an African section and they have all these artifacts and stuff, like ancient artifacts from Africa, you know those things were looted, and they will never be rightfully returned to who they belong to. But there's actually a really big movement of people who are working on restoring objects to whom they belong to from the beginning. So shout out to the people who are doing that work, because it's very, very, very important work. But I had an idea that there was racism in museums, right? Like, I knew that this was a predominantly white space. Like, I knew that. This wasn't going to be the first predominantly white space that I've worked in, though. And I've dealt with racism in the workspace before, and I've had to advocate for myself because of racism at my jobs before. So at this point, I felt like I had a couple notches under my belt to where I knew I could handle it. And also, museums are very elitist spaces. Like, people who work in museums think that they are, not all, but some people who work in museums think that they are just God's gift. The art world is a beast. At one point, there was one donor who approached me at an event, and we were just talking, and I'm being nice because it's my job and I have to schmooze, right? And he was like talking to me, and he was like, for however we got on it, I talked about like where my dad's family is from, where my grandma lives, and it's Waterloo, Iowa. And he was like, oh wow, like I have family in Waterloo, Iowa, which is like very specific because Waterloo is just a very small town in Iowa. And he was like, do you want to know what my grandma used to call little Black kids in Iowa? And I'm just like, what the fuck? And he was like, she used to call them chocolate drops. Why you white man feel the need to say something like that to me when I'm working, or the fact that you even have the audacity to even say that to me in general. It doesn't even matter if I'm at work. The fact that you feel that you have the audacity to say that to a Black woman, period. Like, I don't care. Like, that's so, in that moment too, right? Me, the only really Black person in this space, surrounded by all of these sort of like privileged ass white people, and them just feeling like they can assign and say whatever it is that they want to say to me, that takes a toll on you. And that night was already a weird night because that same night, in my role, I had to work a lot with photographers, and one of the photographers that I was working with asked if he could take test shots of me. And I said, yeah, sure, let's take test shots, like if you need it, right? Like anything for you to get the shot. So I'm taking test shots for him, and then one of my supervisors comes up to me and she's like, she whispers to me and she's like, do not take pictures. Like, if you want to take pictures, you can do that after, but this is not what this is for. Like, do not have him taking your personal pictures for you. Sis, pause. He asked me for test shots. What I'm gonna do, tell him no? You know what I'm saying? Like, it was stuff like those sort of like microaggressions where it's just like you're coming at me really, really harshly for how I present in this space, and it's just not adding up. Also, one time a curator pushed me. Yes, I said it, a curator pushed me because I wanted, and he was a white man, because I wanted to talk to, his name is Rudolph. Shit, I already started calling people out. I might as well continue. But I wanted to talk to him about an upcoming exhibition that I had to work on, and the artist's name is Richard Moss. And I just don't agree with that artist at all. I don't agree with his methodology. He's an artist who uses retired military camera equipment. He uses camera surveillance equipment, and it's the most unethical thing ever to me. I don't get it. Supposedly he's gotten a lot of praise because people are like, look, he's exposing this thing, and I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that at all. And actually I was like thinking about this a little bit deeply because I've been reading the book In the Wake by Christina Sharp, highly recommend, but she sort of addresses this, not specifically to that artist, but she kind of addresses that. But anyways, I wanted to talk to him about this exhibition that he was bringing to the museum because I didn't agree with it, and I wanted to just get a little bit more insight. And people are like, well, you should talk to him, you should talk to Rudolph, you should get some more insight. So he was doing like a staff exhibition tour of one of the exhibitions that they had on view at the time, you know, where curators will do things where they'll lead staff through and just explain the works to them. And afterwards I would like approached him and I was like, hi, like, I'm Taylor, I'm new. This was in my first, I want to say like 2 months at the museum, and I was talking to him about this, and he's like seemingly like listening to me, and then somebody comes and approaches him and wants to talk to him, and he literally like pushed me away so that he could talk to this person. And in that moment, I was like, oh, this what we doing. Like, when people talk about microaggressions, when people talk about racism in workplaces, that isn't necessarily these very bold actions. Like, these are the specific things, the things that make you feel so low when you experience them, because you're like, I'm at work, I have to be professional, I have to maintain this image, I have to do this, I have to do that, right? Like, you're at work, you're trying to like maintain, and then people do stuff like this and you're like, what? And then of course, if I tell someone that he pushed me, they're gonna be like, no, he didn't, right? Like, they're gonna be like, he didn't push you, like, you're tripping. So, but I like know in myself, like my full body knows that he pushed me. I was noticing issues with tokenization of Black artists. So if a journalist approached us being like, so diversity, what do you guys have in your collection? They would always name the same artist over and over. How many times you gonna say Julie Meritu? Like, how many times you gonna say Julie Meritu? Because Julie Meritu checks off a lot of their identity boxes that would make them seem like they're doing good work and that they're being diverse, right? And that they're being inclusive. So if we say Julie Meritu, an artist who is queer, who is Black, who is a woman, right? We get to check off all the boxes, like, oh, we win, we did that. But it's like, you're tokenizing this artist, right? Is that all Black artists are for you? Like, just a means for y'all to look good? But you don't have any Black staff for real who can even really speak to the true experiences of that artwork. Or there'd be issues where we would have an exhibition and that exhibition would be of a Black contemporary artist, but you don't even have enough Black people on staff or people from that cultural background, even if the artist isn't Black, to speak to that work, to talk about the cultural nuances that exist to that work, to create educational programming that could really enhance that exhibition. It was like they're trying to show that they're diverse, but on the inside they weren't. And then they were also very just cruel and nasty to the Black and brown and POC workers and employees who existed on the inside. So it's like we have this facade like we're beautiful and we're just like this like cultural landmark, when in reality you're treating Black people like basura, like you're treating Black people like shit. Okay, so what place does that put Black employees in when the museum is being celebrated for having the work of Black artists, but you as a Black person aren't being treated right on the inside. Like, what you supposed to do? I'm supposed to just sit here and eat my rice? I'm supposed to just sit here and accept that? I'm just supposed to sit here and watch y'all get applauded when you're really not even doing the work. And then if you bring a Black artist into the space, it's the Black people that have to advocate to make sure that you can even do right by that artist for real. It's the Black people who are putting their jobs on the line to make sure that you're actually doing work that is at the level that this Black artist even deserves. So it's cruel. And then when I would speak up, because I started speaking up at this job very early on. Like, if there's one thing I'm going to do, it's stand up for myself. I have a warrior spirit. It's in my bones. It's in my blood. I have to stand up for myself. I have to advocate for myself. But I've been in a lot of experiences where people have done me really dirty. And it's like a muscle that I've been able to build up for me. So I was constantly advocating for myself. I was constantly talking and speaking up. Towards the end of my time there, and I was only there for a year, but towards the end of my time there, I made a point that I was going to bring race up in as many public spaces and forums as possible. So anytime we had a meeting that consisted of multiple departments, anytime we had all staff meetings, I was going to talk about race, because they were saying it, they weren't even really saying it. They were alluding to it and talking about what they wanted to do, but they didn't really have any action steps in place. And then they did this bogus training, this race training, which was unhelpful, which was terribly planned. Race Forward did it. They did not do good work. If you are someone out there who works in diversity and inclusion, do not hire Race Forward. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're doing. But also, to the point, do diversity and inclusion efforts even really work? Do they even really work? Or are diversity and inclusion initiatives just another performative way for folks to get away with being violent and harmful to their employees? Because how can I be racist if I just had a race training? Taylor, you're tripping. I just sat in the training with you, girl, and I told you that my dad didn't see color, and this is something of the new generation, and it's young people who are tripping, not us. So how could I be racist? Right. So this is how it works, right? I think diversity and inclusion initiatives often just lead to more harm and violence, in the same way that we talk about reform, in the same way that a lot of Black scholars and theorists like Angela Davis has said that reform can lead you into more trouble. Reform can take you back. Reform can lead you into more violence. Like, reform is not the answer. We have to dismantle it. We have to burn it down. We have to burn it down. But I digress. So I was always very vocal about the things that I saw, about the things that I experienced, about the things that I just didn't think was right. At one point, I advocated for an exhibition by a Black artist named Dawood Bey, and I was able to expand his marketing budget by like $20,000 because they had cut the budget. They had to do budget cuts, and the only show that really got bumped down was the show by the Black artist. And I was like, y'all thought. So I made a point to advocate for that and for that to happen. And I did that in front of like some of their biggest and largest donors. And I'm very proud of myself for that. But what happened was I did that, and they tried to discredit me for my work, and the heads of my department tried to use my fire and advocacy and take it on as their own, and being like, oh, well, we've recognized, as opposed to like, no, y'all wouldn't even be thinking about this if Taylor didn't say anything. And that's when I was like, I gotta go. I gotta leave this job, because one, I don't even like PR and communications, and two, y'all not about to keep treating me like shit. Y'all are not about to keep being rude and racist to me. You're not about to keep like mistreating me and my coworkers. Like, you're not gonna do that and think that it's okay. Like, I'm not the one. I will leave. Okay, I'm talented. I'm a genius. I'm smart. I'm funny. I'm charismatic. I make it fun. Yeah, I was late every day, but I'm fun. And at the end of the day, I'm a good employee, and I make really great relationships across departments, and I had a lot of value. And so when a lot of people found out that I was leaving, they were actually very sad and disappointed, because they're like, oh man, we really need someone like you here, right? Because everybody notices how just exhausting this space is, just how cruel this space is. And there's so much more to get into, and I encourage y'all to just look up sort of like how museums are structured and sort of like why they are such violent spaces. But there were so many people who also noticed it, but again, there were a lot of people who noticed it who didn't say anything. There are a lot of people who noticed it, a lot of white people who noticed it, who watched me put my job on the line constantly, who watched me speak up, who watched me speak and be loud and vocal and fight for myself and advocate for myself, who never stood beside me until later on, till it got real. But there were a lot of people who didn't do that in the moment when I was doing that. And that is interesting, because they're like, oh, it's so sad to see you go. It's sad to see me go because you no longer have a worker mule to do the dirty work that you don't want to because you're trying to protect your job. You're sad to see me go because you're sad to see somebody with so much light and energy leave because they're tired of y'all sucking it away from her. So as opposed to being sad to see me go, how about you put your job on the line to make some changes up in here? Because I'm leaving. Like, I'm not y'all's like mammy. Like, I'm dipping. I will say I was able to learn a lot. Like I said at the beginning of this video, one of my goals was to get in there and to just learn as much as possible, and I surely did that. I learned so much about Black contemporary artists. I learned about the ins and outs of museum. I learned about the jobs that exist within museums. I was also successful in expanding the diversity of journalists that the museum worked with and who they pitched to, because again, before it was mostly older white people who wrote about the museum, and there's a lot of young Black talent out there. Again, I can only really speak to Black people, but there's a lot of young Black talent out there who aren't getting opportunities because these white folks are gatekeeping, and they are so hell-bent on keeping their positions of power that they're not even giving space and room for other people to try and to breathe. I left the museum. I was there for a year. I left in March. Funny enough, I left right before the pandemic. My last 2 weeks at work were the first 2 weeks of shelter in place.
I'm telling you how I cleared that bitch. I'm gonna tell you how I single-handedly annihilated every rat in the building.